When you see what's happened since the financial crisis, how there have been moves, there's been talks, but actually there's not been the dramatic reform that you might expect given the scale of the crisis.
Well, to be fair, there's time. My own belief is it's got to be done this year. If the reform that you've just referred to, which I think is required, which is essentially bank regulation that is common to all of the countries, an enforcement mechanism which deals with people who don't basically live up to those rules. I think we've got until the end of the year. If we don't, by the end of this year,
is it going to happen?
Well, I hope it does. If it doesn't happen, and then the crisis passes, memories are going to fade, and we're going to find ourselves in the same mess in 5 years when the same thing happens again. I think people are very conscious of that, and I think that again, this goes back to what I was saying at Cambridge. That's the real test. The real test is, do they this year deal with the question of bank regulation? Do they do it by the end of the year? And what are they going to do in climate change? And what are they going to do on the whole question of poverty?
The trouble is, let's just take financial regulation. You've got a situation where people are thinking, well, you know, it all depends on competitive advantage. And why should they sign up to something that everybody, you know, that effectively gives a level playing field?
Your question is just so good, but I think the answer is very clear. And that is, part of the problem was the competition for regulation between New York and London. And so now you're going to say, well, now why should New York and London sort of bring in kinds of rules? Why don't they just get back to the competition? Well, the answer is because Paris and Frankfurt are out there trying to figure out how they can come in, and just wait until Hong Kong and Shanghai combine. Today, 4 of the 5 biggest banks in the world are Chinese. They're not going to sit back there. They're going to start to come in. And do London and New York really want the Chinese competing with them on the basis of competitive deregulation? Is that what they really want? I don't think so. So for the first time, I think everybody should understand that if we put these rules in place, then we in New York or London are going to benefit. Because in fact, the competition that's going to be coming from China isn't going to be the kind that's going to drive us all into the wall.
What about, you talk about Africa, and there's just a sort of G20's virtually ignored Africa and the growing population there. But you're also given a warning about that being a source of instability. How dangerous do you think Africa could be? Well,
I think Africa could either be a tremendous positive force. This is in the year 2050, it's going to have 500 million people more in Africa than either China or India. It's going to be the largest population in the world and also the youngest. Now, we've seen what the Chinese economy has done to the global economy. It's really helping it right now. It's a major spur to growth right around the world, the Chinese economy. What I'm saying is in 2050, Africa could be like China is today. It could be that great spur. But if Africa doesn't have decent healthcare systems, if it doesn't have a decent infrastructure, decent education, if it doesn't have the kind of promises that G20 said it would, and that its leadership, African leadership, should deliver on, then what you're going to have is the youngest population in the world, desperate, unemployed. And I think we've now seen what happens when you get desperate, unemployed populations, especially when they're young. And that's where it can become a huge source of misery. And that's something that we're bequeathing to our children. And we can turn that around. We can change that. There's no...
We can?
We can, absolutely.
What is it that the G20 should be doing to address that?
Oh, I think that we should be helping Africa fund its infrastructure. You can't get from one African city to another, let alone transport goods. I think the whole question of food security is immense. I mean, there are droughts, there are breaks in the food chain. There is no reason why Africa cannot become a breadbasket once again, but it's going to require help.
Solving the problems of Africa, solving climate change, sorting out financial regulation. You set up a lot of demands on the G20. One wonders if it's capable of delivering.
Well, I believe it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't ask. These are, after all, the 20 most powerful economies in the world. And this is very much in their self-interest to do this. They can't turn their back on it. Because if they don't turn their back, if they turn their back on climate change, it's their own populations that are going to suffer. If they turn their back on Africa, it's their own populations that are going to suffer. If they turn their back on bank regulation. So that in fact, and I think we've all seen that governments, when pushed by their electorate, can do a great deal. And all I'm saying is these huge issues are very, very much, well, they are the international issues, but they are also very much issues which touch their voters. And you know something? Their voters understand that.
Paul Martin, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Well, thank you for having me.